kind of understand what we're making and why I chose to make it. Okay, so I grew up in small town Nebraska on a farm, raised our own cows, and oh my goodness, could my family cook, okay? So my mom was not only known through our county, but the surrounding counties for her cinnamon rolls and all this stuff that she would bake. So I would introduce myself to someone and they'd say, okay, who are your parents? And I'd say it, oh, your mom's the one that makes that good fill in the blank, okay? So my mom, yeah, can cook, but both of my grandmas are phenomenal as well. So, from, when I was little, food was always around us. It was always good and delicious food. So, of course, I like food then. Obviously, hence my profession. But, so at a young age, I got, excited, and I really loved cooking and doing those kind of things and helping my mom out in the kitchen. But then as I got a little bit older, I started thinking about the nutrition aspect. I had no idea there was anything called a dietitian until my mom had, suggested, why don't you maybe think about doing that for your career? And I was like, I can do that, talking about food all day and get paid for it, heck yeah, so I thought it was great. So, I have, so my upbringing is very delicious food, not necessarily the healthy stuff, but the really good home cooking. And so then I have that nutrition background. So really I love taking those really kind of just the traditional, really good recipes, those ones that maybe are near and dear to people's hearts, and try to put a little bit of a healthy spin on them or put tweaks on them to make them still taste really, really good, but also be a little bit healthier for us. So, I'm not going to do anything with edamame or weird, chia seeds or anything like that today. We are going to kind of focus on just those basic good, good foods and just try to help make some healthier spins on them, okay? So we're going to start, it's obviously tailgating season, so that's kind of the theme for today. And we're already a couple months into it, and honestly, tailgate season for me, I don't know about you, but it's harder for me to maintain my weight during football season than it is during the holidays, because every single week there's something that somebody's having, or even just if it's NFL Sunday, you're going to make some snacks and watch the game and that kind of thing. And what's tricky about that is if you're not careful, you could be taking in hundreds of extra calories every weekend, and that's going to pile up pretty quick. And I personally don't want to start the holiday season already kind of, in the hole. So, trying to make the tailgates a little bit healthier, football parties, that sort of thing, excuse me, is going to help everybody. So we're going to start with the dip, which you guys have already started sampling. But before we do that, I actually want to take some time to kind of go over what some good dips might be for football parties, because it seems like they're ever present. It doesn't matter where you're at. And I know queso dip and nachos are kind of the go-tos. Probably not, the healthiest. Of course, yes, I have done a healthy spin on queso dip before, but we're not making that one today. I have a couple of kind of visuals to show you guys first. We all know about salsa. I mean, it's tomatoes, it's vegetable, very good thing, but there's such a variety too. You can get, I just have the traditional, there's like the peach or the pineapple, there's black bean and corn, so many different varieties, and honestly, if you can always have this there, it's great, because it's, 2 or 10 calories per 2 tablespoon serving, okay? We have that queso dip, it's probably going to be close, it's going to be over 100 per 2 tablespoon serving, and it's like, who really eats 2 tablespoons? And, if you do, more power to you. But, it's like you have that, so it's maybe too big of servings, and then you have the chips on top of it, so it can add up really, really quickly. So I really like to kind of go with this. In terms of other things too, guacamole, okay? I'm a sucker for that. I love guacamole. So if I do, and avocados, they're a heart-healthy fat. It's really great for you that way, but it is a fat, so it is pretty high in calories too. So, moderation is key. Most, homemade salsas and even store-bought salsas are probably going to be about 50, 60 calories per 2 tablespoon serving, which isn't terrible, but again, those can be cut quickly. So making sure that you're aware of those portion sizes can be helpful. Now, I personally like the homemade stuff. I like to do it that way, but if you are in a pinch and need to do a store-bought one, be careful, because a lot of those store-bought guacamoles have very little avocado in them. I mean, when I say that, I will read the ingredients list, and it'll be, the avocado will be in 2% or less section, okay? So it's very, very low in it, but I have holy guacamole here. If you guys seen this before? This one actually, if you look at the ingredients, first one is avocado, okay? So it is pretty good. I still, when I do this, I will still chop up some onions and tomatoes and still put it in there to give it a little more taste and texture. give it a little bit more of a homemade feel. So this would be a good option. Another thing with tortilla chips is bean dip, okay? So Fritos, I mean, I look at this and for the longest time I was like, there's no way this is healthy, but I mean, it's really not too bad. I have a Trader Joe's one that is excellent, and both of them are very comparable in nutrition facts. I really like the Trader Joe's one, and it's really cheap too, so that's helpful. So these again would be good ones. Now, let's talk about those tortilla chips, okay? This is another spot where you can get in trouble because the restaurant style ones, I mean, honestly, you can have 6 or 8 chips for 140 calories, which I don't know, I probably have more than 6 or 8 chips. And so again, it can be really easy for the calories to add up. Even the scoops, you know, in theory, it's a great idea because, you know, you can get more dip in and that kind of thing. But, you know, depending on the dip, that's maybe not such a good thing. So what I always get is the Tostitos bite size. And the reason that there's nutritionally no difference from the other ones, you know, it's just that they're smaller, okay? So you get 24 of these. For the same number of calories, you would get, you know, 6 or 8. And just because it's smaller and the portion size is bigger, it helps you kind of slow down and not eat quite as much. And you can't get as much dip on there, which from a nutrition standpoint, it is good. And you still get the dip taste, you know, you still get the flavor, it's just not overwhelming, okay? So that's kind of what I do there. Another good dip, you know, we all know about the hummuses. And these are, you know, really good, made of ground chickpeas. So, of course, it's a good source of fiber, good source of protein. Serving these with pita chips is a great way to go. Even fresh veggies, these go really, really well with fresh veggies. So I figure anytime you can get veggies out there, why not, you know, and get people to like them. And so, like the Finos and Sabra, I think that's how you say it, those are both usually in the refrigerated section. The Wild Garden hummus, I've only ever seen this at Hy-Vee in their health markets, but I like it because it's actually a little bit lower in calories. Like this one, I guess, for 2 tablespoons is 60. This one for 2 tablespoons is only 35. So, you know, every little bit helps. But, you know, it's not like this is a bad one, but if you really are kind of trying to cut back on calories, give this one a try and see if you don't like it. They both come in a variety of flavors, so they would be good ones there. Also with chips, I will say that if you have ever tried, anybody ever tried these? Okay, amazing, okay? So whether you're just having chips there or you're using it for some sort of dipper, you know, if it's just a plain sea salt one and you have it with a dairy-based dip, really, really good. So unlike baked chips, which, I mean, I have some baked chips here. These are definitely a good choice for 120 calories, you get 20 chips. Same thing for this one. So they're pretty comparable there, but what's different with the pop chips is it's popped like popcorn instead of baked. So it has a really, I don't know, just a different kind of texture and taste to it. So I really, really like them. Again, you can find these at Target or at Hy-Vee is where I usually find these, okay? So any one of these, if you're going to be serving potato chips, is much better. You know, the serving sizes are much bigger for less calories, so that's obviously a good thing. Now, in terms of dairy-based dips, which you guys had today, those can spell trouble because they can be pretty, not, I don't want to say bad, because I don't want to say there's any good, you know, there's no good or bad foods, but very high calories. So you get some of those prepackaged dairy dips, and they can be 140 calories per 2 tablespoon serving, which is, to me, it just is a ton, okay? You can get some of the lighter dairy dips, like a Dean's dip in the refrigerated section, where they only have 35 calories per 2 tablespoon serving. So it's much, much better. Now, you can also do your homemade ones. So what I like to do is just, you know, take Greek yogurt, which you guys may have heard of this before, plain, well, even traditional yogurt, just a plain variety. Substitute that for sour cream and just mix that with a ranch or some dill seasoning and that sort of thing. And make your dip that way, and it's going to drastically reduce the number of calories that you have. Now, I tried doing just the totally Greek plain yogurt instead of the sour cream, and it's kind of 50-50 whether or not people like it. So try it. Maybe if you're going to be serving at a party, maybe try it first and see what you think about it. What I since have done, you know, since finding out kind of the hard way, is I'll do half sour cream, half of the yogurt, and then that way it's not so easily seen. Even if you're using a light sour cream, that's much better than the full fat, okay? Now, today we are actually doing what you had was a skinny spinach dip, is what I like to call it. I mean, we typically do a hot one, but I found a cold recipe, and I thought maybe for something a little bit different, it would be good to do. So as we go through it, I'll kind of explain to you what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and that sort of thing, okay? So if you look at your recipe, you know, we just start with 8 ounces of reduced fat cream cheese. And really, anytime that I can do this in a recipe, just use a lower fat one, I do. Just, it's a simple, easy way to make the switch. Now, do I ever use the non-fat completely? Sometimes I do, but I won't use it by itself because for me, and maybe it's just the, my background and kind of the snobby-ish taste that I have, but I feel like it's kind of lacking a little something when it's just the fat-free. So if I do some of the fat-free, I'll do a combo. So maybe, half of the fat-free, half of the reduced fat, but with this recipe, it just called for one package, and so in terms of cost-wise, why pay more, So we just have one of those, and then I am using half a cup of Hellmann's Light Mayo, and you'll see too that on that recipe handout that I bolded that. And the reason for that is because I'm very partial to it, because if you would compare it to even the Kraft Light Mayo, this has per tablespoon 35 calories. Kraft has 50, yeah. So granted, 15 calories doesn't seem like that much, but if you're using half of a cup, that winds up being over 120 calories in terms of the recipe, okay? So every little bit really will help. So that's why I did that. I mean, if you want to use Kraft, that's okay, but just know that the nutrition information will be slightly altered for that, okay? So basically, I just mixed those two together. I have some green onions here that I'm just mixing in to help add a little bit of flavor. So we're going to mix that, nice and well. And I actually like to mix this. If you have an electric mixer, it helps beat the cream cheese a little bit better, so it won't be quite as lumpy as what mine might be today. Okay, so we have that mixed together. And then I just have some thawed frozen chopped spinach, okay? So I'm gonna add that in. And has anybody ever worked with that stuff before? I'm sure a lot of people have. Okay, I think it's kind of a pain in the butt to have to drain it all. And I don't know if any of you have any good ways of doing it, but what I typically do is I'll just put it in a colander and then just press it in with a paper towel. I don't know if anybody else has better suggestions. I'm all ears if you do.
You can press it with a spoon too.
Oh, that would be good.
That's true.
And that would probably not waste quite so many paper towels. Because yesterday I was like, have this big stack of green paper towels. Okay, so we're gonna do this until it's just mixed, okay? And then we are adding in some roasted red peppers, okay? And I love roasted vegetables, okay? It's my favorite way to prepare them. Now I just got the jarred stuff, but for whenever you're just preparing plain old vegetables, try roasting them because it really brings out the natural flavors and the sweetness and makes the vegetables so much better. So heck, Brussels sprouts, roasted. I mean, if your kid doesn't like them, try them that way. He might actually like it. So we just use, the roasted red peppers. Again, you can get it jarred. They're usually either in the produce section or they're going to be in the, with the condiments like the olives and the pickle relish and that sort of thing. And so they'll just come like that, and you just have to dice them up. And then I have an Italian cheese blend here. And typically, when I can, I will just use a reduced fat cheese. Simple way to cut back on fat and calories. I typically don't do the fat-free because for me it's just kind of tastes rubbery, and I personally don't care for it. If you do, go ahead and use it. It's a good way to, again, cut back on the fat and calories as long as it doesn't, take away from the satisfaction factor. Because again, we want it to be better for us, but to taste good too. So what I did, with this one, with the Italian cheese, it's kind of a hard one to find. You can find it sometimes, but because it's so iffy, I just, instead of cutting back on the fat, I just cut back on the amount. So the original recipe called for a cup, I just cut back to 3/4. And what's, another thing you can do too is use sharp flavored cheeses. So like Parmesan is an Italian cheese, but it's very sharp flavored. And when it's, or very strong flavored. So when it is strong flavored, you can actually cut back on the amount and still achieve a really good cheesy flavor because of that strong flavor, okay? So that's basically all there is to it. Pretty simple recipe, honestly, except for the squeezing the spinach, or the dry. That's probably the hardest part of it. So what you'll do then is just refrigerate this for an hour, but I think it's even better when you can do it overnight because it really gives those flavors, a chance to marinate. And that's what you guys had today, that had been sitting overnight. But it will keep, for several days as well. Now, if you want, it kind of depends on your preference. If you want a really thick dip, this will be very thick. So you can see now it's pretty thick, but it gets even thicker as it sits. And so you can add up to 1/3 of a cup of skim milk and just mix it in to help thin it out a little bit. That also helps a little bit with portion size because when it's so thick, you're just taking like these big old scoops, and so it helps that way as well. So I like to thin it out a little bit, okay? And the crackers that I use, you guys, if you saw them over there, they were the Special K multigrain crackers. I love them. I'm pretty much obsessed with them because one, they taste good, but also Well, they're not 100% whole grain. I will say that, but the first ingredient is whole grain, so we know it is the main ingredient. So that's a good thing. But portion-wise, 120 calories worth of that, you can get that with 24 chips, okay, or 24 crackers. Which even like Triscuits, very healthy, but they're so thick and dense that it's like 6 of them. So again, for me, it's easier for me to control my portions that way. Not that they're necessarily nutritionally superior. You can serve them with whatever whole grain cracker that you want. Just ideally to keep it nutritious, you want to do whole grain. Okay, so what did we think of the spinach dip? It's a little different because it wasn't hot, but pretty good. Okay, so I get a thumbs up for that one. Okay, okay, good. Does anybody else have any suggestions for dips, or maybe with the recipe that I did, or just what you might do to help keep things healthy? Yes.
What do you think of wheat thins?
Some of them are 100% whole wheat, so that's great. There's other ones that they might have whole grains in them, but they might be a little bit down the list. So really, you need to look at the ingredients list. The first ingredient should be whole grain, and then you know that even if it's not 100%, that the main ingredient is whole grain. So that's the case with the Special K one. So I would look at that part of it because they can be a very healthy cracker. So, good question. Anybody else? Yeah.
I put water chestnuts in there, so
Yes.
I need to go a little further too.
Yes. I've seen recipes like that too, and I think that's a really, really great idea as well. So it helps kind of, if you think about in terms of calorie density, so the number of calories that are in a bite of food, when you're adding in those lower calorie foods like water chestnuts or if it's vegetables and that kind of thing, it helps actually lower the amount of calories per serving. So that would be something that would be good. So you could do that. You could add extra roasted red peppers, that sort of thing. Anybody else? No? Okay, we're gonna move on to the chili. And honestly, is it like the perfect day for chili or what? Oh my gosh. So, because when I started thinking, in my head a couple weeks ago about what I wanted to do, it was still pretty nice. But I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do chili. I'm gonna risk it. I'm gonna do it, and it worked out in my favor. Okay. Now this is a dish that there's so much variability on whether or not it can be good for us. I have seen recipes that they are, maybe 250 calories per cup, which is really good for chili. I've seen some that are upwards of 500 calories per cup. And so again, just so variable. Another thing with chili or any kind of soup is that it can be very high in sodium. Okay, so we know, if you're watching your blood pressure, that can really make or break a day. I've seen some soups, some chilies that have over 1,300 milligrams of sodium. Okay, and just to kind of put that in perspective, people that are over the age of 50 or have high blood pressure should limit themselves to 1,500 milligrams per day. So that's almost 100% right there. Now, what if you are under 50 or have a healthy blood pressure? 2,300 milligrams is the recommendation, but 1,300 in that one cup of chili is still a lot, okay? So my goal, when making chili is to reduce calories, reduce fat, and also reduce that sodium. With soups, it's really hard to make it an actual low sodium food, but I think I did pretty good in how much I reduced it. So we'll see at the end kind of where we ended up at. But that, so that said, those are some things you can think about. Most people too also have their own chili, recipe, their go-to recipe that they do. And so even though I have a specific recipe today, as we go through it, I'm gonna kind of give you tips on your kind of go-to chili recipe, how you can actually make it a little bit healthier. So if you don't want to stray away from it, or upset the family or something like that, you can still make it work, okay? So really with this one, we're starting off, which I kind of cheated and I cooked some of this ahead of time. So if it looks a little weird, that's why, because it's already cooked. So I have here just chopped onions, red peppers, and carrots, okay? And this is the very first step of where I start trying to make it healthy, okay? So when we saute these vegetables, we usually do it in oil, okay? So we know, olive oil, canola oil, all of those kinds of, unsaturated fats are good ones to use, but they're also, like the avocados, they're fats. And so 1 tablespoon, has 120 calories in it. So I try not to go overboard with it. So I'll limit myself to 1 tablespoon of this, and then as it's sauteing, if I see it kind of getting dry on the bottom, I'll actually add in a beef or a chicken broth instead, and that still helps saute it, give it good flavor. But I mean, per tablespoon of broth, it's like 1 calorie. So it's so minimal compared to that. And you're not using a ton, so it's really not adding it very much sodium either, okay? So doing that is one step in helping kind of cut back on calories, but also, however many vegetables you usually use, why not, you don't have to completely double it, but why not increase it, add a little bit more, especially, if you have family members or people that maybe are kind of have an aversion to vegetables, it's gonna be chopped off, chopped up, and there's so many other ingredients in chili that it's easy to disguise it so they don't really see it. And that goes back to, like I said, reducing the calorie density of a recipe. This is a really easy way to do it, okay? So we just, saute these till they're soft. It takes about 10 minutes. And then adding in some cumin, okay? Cumin is, have to tell you, my boyfriend says that I am just like too obsessed with cumin, but I think it just gives such, great flavor to food. So putting that in, letting that cook for just about a minute before we add in our beef, okay? I told you I grew up on a farm, and I'm a beef girl. So that said, it doesn't mean that you have to use beef, okay? I used a lean ground beef, so it was 93% lean. Ideally, when you're using beef, if you can do at least 90%, that's gonna be enough to be considered a lean meat, okay? Now, if you wanted to, you could definitely use ground turkey. Not a problem there. Just make sure that you're getting the lean ones. Now, what do you guys think in terms of, if I had that 93% lean beef and I had that ground turkey, what do you think the calorie difference is for maybe, we'll say a 4-ounce serving? So a little bit bigger than the palm of my hand. 50 calories? Anybody else have guesses? I actually looked it up right before it came. It was like 10 calories was all the difference. I was shocked. And, I'm sure I can't remember what website I looked at for the beef, but I know it was a reliable one. So there can be variances in that a little bit, but it was like for the turkey, it was 170 calories for a 4-ounce serving. It was 180 for the beef, and that's really pretty close. It might be, even if it's upwards to 200 calories for a 4-ounce serving, 30 calories, it really isn't much. Fat-wise, it was a gram of fat difference and only 1 gram of saturated fat. So, don't feel like you have to do the ground turkey. If you like it and you want to do it, that's awesome, but don't feel like you can't have your beef if you're going to eat healthy too. So, and if you are kind of a beef person, go to the Nebraska Beef Council's website because they have tons of really good healthy recipes on there that use lean ground beef. And there's a lot of research there to show you how the kind of the nutrition facts of different cuts of beef and how much it really can fit into a healthy diet. So, I'm sorry, that's my partial, I'm partial to beef, but again, ground turkey is another good option, okay? So we're just cooking that and again, this lean ground beef is a really easy way to cut back on calories. So if we would make the switch from 85% lean to that 93%, per 4-ounce serving, we're saving about 70 calories and about 7 grams of fat per serving. So I'm using a pound of the beef here too. So multiply that, and I'm doing math on a Friday. It's close to 300 calories that we're saving just by doing that. Okay. So we're gonna cook that till it's all ground, or till it's all no pink is left. And then we'll start adding in the good stuff. Okay. So I'm just using some crushed tomatoes here. So we'll pour that in to a 28-ounce can. And then I have 2 cups of water, and then I have more spices. So I have chili powder, you can see a lot of chili powder. I have oregano, a little bit of salt, and some pepper, okay? So let's talk about this part of it, okay? With the crushed tomatoes, these are, again, they can be high in sodium. So this one really isn't, it's not as bad as some canned vegetables, but it's not necessarily a low sodium food, okay? So it's hard to find low sodium or no salt added crushed tomatoes, but if your recipe calls for tomato juice or diced tomatoes or something like that, stewed tomatoes, a lot of times there is that no salt added version. And this is a really, really good way to cut that sodium out, okay? To just kind of give you an idea, half of a cup of the tomatoes, not the juice, but of the actual canned tomatoes, would probably be about 400 milligrams per half cup. So if you're adding in a couple cans of it, it can add a lot. So again, this is a really good way to cut back on it. Because, this one wasn't low sodium, actually adding the water still gives it, kind of spreads it out a little bit, but it still has a good tomatoey flavor. Okay, so again, that's a way that you can reduce the sodium. And then you can see that I just used herbs and spices. Aside from a little bit of salt, it was mostly spices, okay? And that, again, is a great, great way to save on that sodium. So we like to kind of go to those chili seasoning packets because it's quick, it's easy, it gives good flavor. But 1 tablespoon of that has like 300 milligrams of sodium. Okay, so you can see how the sodium can really add up really, really quickly. So I actually used like a 1/4 cup of chili powder, which is a lot, but it really helps give that good flavor. Calorie-free, fat-free, and there's actually research that's starting to show that herbs and spices are full of antioxidants that can help prevent, slow down aging and prevent disease. So hey, why not throw more in there? We've got nothing to lose there, okay? So we've got that all stirred in. And then I'm adding in my beans, okay? So I have some pinto beans and black beans. These are all rinsed and drained. And then kidney beans, okay? Now, there's, of course, with the canned vegetables, we're thinking again, what's something that we can do to make it a little bit healthier? Try to get the no salt added when you can. Now, these, I've found that Hy-Vee is really great about having the no salt added vegetables. The other places in town, you know, it's kind of hit and miss. So if you want that guarantee, I mean, they're so cheap, and they don't go bad, just go stock up on some and then you have them there. And so that helps us lower the sodium. Now, if you can't find them, you don't want to run somewhere else to get them, the no salt added ones, just drain them and rinse them with water really well, and you can get rid of up to 40% of the sodium, which is pretty darn good. So it's not all the way there, but we're doing pretty good there, okay? So that's one thing. And then another thing you can see that I did is, well, I've talked about how I used 1 pound of ground beef, and then that's actually cutting back, okay? So the original recipe called for, I think it was 1.5 pounds. So I cut back and I added in an extra can of beans, okay? It helps lower the calories, lower the fat, and then increases the fiber too, okay? So it's kind of win-win-win. And so if you were looking at this, and I guess when you get your chili, you will see this, that those extra vegetables that I added at the beginning, you can hardly tell because there's so much else going in here, okay? So once we mix that all together, let it simmer for, 50 minutes to an hour, and that'll really give the flavors a chance to blend. And I mean, because if you would serve it right as soon as it boils, it tastes really tomatoey. You can't taste a lot of the spices. So I like to let it cook. And even better, if you can maybe put it on a slow cooker and let it simmer for a while, it just gets even better, So, which I'm sure you guys all know that happens. It's like how leftover spaghetti is always better the second day. Why is that? Like it's the flavors marinate or something like that. So again, that's how you can do this recipe, take your recipe, make it healthier, however you would want to do it. Also, toppings. Let's talk about that real quick here. That's one thing that, people like to maybe load their chili with sour cream and cheese and that kind of thing, and that can make those calories, even though the soup's a little bit better, it can make it add up pretty darn quick. So stick to the low-fat cheeses, and again, like if you can get a sharp cheddar, then you won't have to use quite as much. If you do sour cream, do the light, or again, you can use that plain yogurt for a substitute for sour cream. Otherwise, onions, green onions, jalapenos, those are all, even cilantro is really good on top, so you could do something like that. And saltine crackers aren't too terrible bad, they're not terribly high in calories. I have oyster crackers, and it's like 60 or something no, maybe not 60, but a ton for a serving size, okay? So they're gonna spread a lot further, they're not gonna be going terribly overboard, in calories that way, okay? So, you guys, I was gonna quiz you and see if you knew how many calories was in this one, darn it. But you have the recipes in front of you. So, you can see that, the serving size is 1 1/4 cups, okay? So, that's not, cup for cup. If you would break it down to a cup, it'd be about 235 per serving versus we talked about before, some can have upwards to 500. So this is really, really great, especially if you're a chili lover. Sodium-wise, again, it's not a low sodium food, but per cup, it's right around 500. So again, we were talking about the 1300 before. So even though it's not a low sodium food, it is much, much better. So if you have higher blood pressure, this is something where you can have this, and then just make sure that throughout the rest of the day, you are making good, in terms of sodium, lower sodium choices. It's kind of like a bank account, so you have so much sodium that you can spend in a day. So once you kind of, if you spend more here, spend less in other places, and that can help it balance out. Okay? Does anybody have questions about this part? Going once, going twice? Okay. All right, so we will move on to number 3 here. So these are cocoa banana bars, okay? And I want it with desserts, I wanted, I just thought about a brownie, and how that's kind of the go-to. So I wanted to do a brownie type thing, but I found this recipe, and I honestly didn't have to do all that much to it to actually make it a little bit lighter. So it's like makes my job easy, that it's like that. And it is, oh my gosh, it's so good. So we'll go ahead and start here with butter. How funny is that that's the first ingredient to a healthier recipe? But honestly, we're doing a half of a cup of butter, which for those of you that do any baking at all, that's really not all that much. Usually they'll call for a cup. So we're already, even though butter's not necessarily a healthy food, we're not using a ton of it, okay? So it's softened, we've got that in there, and then the second ingredient, not all that healthy either. We've got sugar, but of course that's an essential in baking. Now, with the original, this is one tweak that I did make, okay? So with the original recipe, it called for a cup of sugar. If you are wanting to reduce sugar in a recipe, you can do a couple different things. Reduce it by 25% like I did, and honestly, it's not going to impact the flavor, the texture, anything like that. You can't even tell a difference. And so that's kind of the quick and easy way. You can also use an alternative sweetener if you want to. Some people prefer to stay away from them. It's kind of a personal choice what you want to do. But if you make sure that if you are using one, use one that is heat stable. So Splenda is kind of my go-to when I do that because it does bake very, very well. So you can either completely substitute it for the sugar, or you can do half and half, which is usually what I do. I don't really have any reason, just kind of a personal preference for it. So it still helps cut back on the calories and the carbohydrates if you're trying to watch those. But it's, you're still keeping good flavor, okay? So you just mix this together until it's good and creamed, and kind of nice and fluffy. And then we are adding in some vanilla here. It's just a teaspoon of vanilla, and then I have 1 egg, okay? Now, for recipes that usually have more than 1 egg in them, you can also tweak them this way, okay? Basically just substituting 2 egg whites for 1 whole egg, or you can also do 1/4 of a cup of the egg beaters into them, okay? And that's gonna help cut back on some calories, saturated fat, and also cholesterol, okay? Now, that said, like I said, when it has more than 1 egg, I always keep 1 whole egg in there because in terms of like the scientific principles and the functions of how that egg plays in a baked product, it does have some important qualities there. So I try to keep that 1 whole egg in there, and then after that, I go ahead and substitute in there, okay? And also, as I'm going through this, I'm giving you tips on different ways to modify baked goods, but I also recommend that you only make a couple changes at a time, okay? So I'm talking 1 or 2. Don't go much beyond that, because then if something goes wrong, you don't know where it was. What did I do that didn't turn out so good? So kind of, go through round 1, make 1 or 2 changes. That turns out good, then you can keep going after that. So, but don't do too much too soon, and you just might kind of run into trouble that way, okay? So we've got this all mixed together, and then we're adding in mashed bananas, okay? So I have, it's about, 1.5 cups, but it's about 3 big bananas is what it is, okay? And this is the reason why I did not try to take away any of the fat content in that butter, okay? Usually when you want to cut back on fat in a recipe, the most often thing you hear is, applesauce. Substitute in half of the applesauce, or applesauce for half of the fat. So say that it calls for a cup of butter or shortening or oil. You can do half of a cup of the fat and then half of a cup of the applesauce. But you can go way beyond the applesauce, okay? So honestly, even though this is, the bananas are already called for, if you want, in a different recipe, if you wanted to use mashed bananas as a fruit puree, you could do that. You can do really pureed pears, peaches, and honestly, I have a phenomenal hot fudge cake recipe that I use, and I actually use baby food prunes for the fat, and I didn't tell people that before I served it, and so it's pretty funny because they were just going nuts over how good it was, and then when you tell them what happens, or what's in it, they're like, oh my gosh. So sometimes it's better just not to tell them that way, but honestly, in chocolate recipes, the prunes work really, really well, and because you're using the baby food, you're not having to go through the work of pureeing it yourself. So that's even better. Okay. So we have that mixed in. Okay, so we're gonna let that sit, and then separately we're just gonna mix in the rest of the dry ingredients. So I just have a little, flour here, and so what's an easy way to make this recipe better with flour? What could we do?
You use like a whole wheat flour.
Yep, you could do whole wheat. And again, this is something where you can use half of it. Okay. Sometimes you can do the whole, the whole amount, but your recipe might be a little bit denser that way. So maybe start off with half, and if you want to go the full 9 yards or 10 yards, whatever that saying is, you can go ahead and do that later, okay? Oops. All right, and then I just have a mixture here of just a little bit of salt, baking soda, baking powder, okay? So we're just gonna quick mix this together. And then we're gonna add it to the rest of it. Okay. And sometimes I'm lazy and I just add it all in at once too, so if you really want to be a stickler for following the recipe, go for it, but I don't typically do it. So anyway, so we're going to mix this all together until it's well blended. Just takes me a little bit. I'm so used to those electric mixers now that when I have to do it with my hand, I think it's torture, so. Okay. So we're getting it all mixed in, and then what we're gonna do here is we're going to divide it in half, okay? So, and of course, just a guesstimate. So, I'm gonna pour half of it into this bowl. I'm gonna set this aside, and then with this half, I'm putting in some baking cocoa. Okay, and so we'll just mix it in. And there's been a lot of, research in recent years about how chocolate can be good for us. And really you got to be careful with it because, of course you say, hey, chocolate's good for me, I'll eat it. But if you really are wanting to get the good benefits of it, it has to be, with like baking chocolate, even if it's the squares or such, it's supposed to be 85% dark chocolate. And that is really hard to find. Usually they're lower, they're only about 55% or 65%. Of the cocoa. So, but this cocoa powder, it's not maybe all the way there, but it's pretty good. So we're getting some benefits from it, right? Okay, so we've got this mixed together. So what we're gonna do first is just pour this into the bottom of a 9x13 pan. Sprayed, of course, so it doesn't stick. That. I'm just going to spread it evenly throughout the bottom. All right, so we've got that done. Now I'm going to take the other half. Use a spatula here. And we're just going to pour it on top, okay? And if you can kind of not just pour it all in one lump, but kind of spread it out evenly, it's going to make the next step a little bit easier for you. Okay, so we got that done. And then what you're going to do is I kind of spread it out over on top. And this is kind of up to you here. It's a little bit subjective how you want to make the final product turn out. This is actually pretty easy to spread just straight over top. So if you want it to be more of a divided bar, you can just kind of do that and leave it go. But I like to take a little knife then, and then kind of, how you do with the marble cheesecake brownies, and then just kind of swirl it around a little bit so it gets all mixed in good together. So I'm kind of cheating and using a spatula instead of a knife. But in your own kitchen, you can kind of do it that way. And just kind of give it that little swirl effect. And then bake it in the oven for like 25 minutes until it comes out clear, the toothpick that you insert in the center comes out clear. And then, per serving, if you look at these, it has about 170 calories per serving, and it's a pretty generous serving. This whole pan would make like 15 bars, so it's not like, have you ever, I have to vent for a second. You get on these websites, I'm sorry, it's honestly making its way up to one of my biggest pet peeves. So you find a recipe or a light dessert recipe, and you're like, oh my gosh, this only has 160 calories in it, or something like that. And then you go to the serving size and it's like this big. It's like 2 by 7, seriously, really. So this one you actually get a decent portion size for that 170 calories. And so, when we're talking about other desserts, brownies, that kind of thing, they can easily be over 300 for that same serving size or less. So this is that's what I like. You get the chocolate, but you also get the kind of banana taste, and it's a good flavor combo. And oh my gosh, they are so moist. They literally just fall apart in your mouth. So it's great. It's really, really good. Also, the more ripe the bananas are, the kind of sweeter that it is, so that's even better. And following the theme of how everything gets better the second day, for some reason, I don't know why, but these are so much better the second day. They're good the first day, but they're even better the second day. And honestly, I have no idea why. So, but I really do believe that. So what's nice about that is with all of these things, you can make them all the day ahead if you need to. So then that day of the party or whatever, if you're hosting or you're going somewhere, you're not going to be rushed because this is all things that can be made ahead of time. And then, it's going to be even better the next day, okay? So again, these are just different football recipes. Does anybody have, questions about the dessert or just different tweaks that you can make with baking? Yes?
Have you ever done black bean brownies?
Yes, I have.
I thought that sounded crazy, but my mom made them one time, and they are so moist.
Yes, they really are. So if you guys didn't hear, she asked about making black bean brownies. Has anybody else ever done that? Okay, so what you'll do is you just take And gosh, I did it such a long time ago. Do you blend the black beans up first
I
or not?
didn't make it myself, my mom made it, so I'm not
I
really
think,
sure.
I want to say that you do because it'd be weird to have beans and brownies, but you do
Yeah,
that and it
just make it in there.
But basically you mix that with the box of brownies and bake it, and it helps cut back on calories and fat, but also adds fiber. And I actually kind of did the hush-hush thing, and I did that with my family who, my family's come a long ways for me since I kind of started out on my journey. At first, they wouldn't eat anything that I would make because they're like, "What'd you do to it? What'd you sneak into it?" But now they trust me enough that I can make it better for you and it still tastes good. But at that point in time, I didn't tell them, so I made it for them and they ate them up, and so it worked really well. Another thing you can do with packaged mix, which I think this one is actually I like it even better than the brownies, which. It's just a personal thing, but if you take like spice cake mix in a can of the pumpkin puree, the pure pumpkin, it bakes the same. It's not gonna rise as much, but it's giving it a good pumpkin cake like taste and for not nearly as many calories. Another thing you can do now that you said that, I'm just kind of going off here, is you might have heard of the diet soda cake. So if anybody's a fan of the Hungry Girl kind of recipes, if anybody's ever heard of that, she does what she does is she takes pretty much any cake mix and she'll just add in a flavored diet soda, not necessarily a certain one. Obviously, if you're doing a white cake, you don't want to do a cola. But you just pour that in, bake it, and it's the same thing. If that one is really moist and it kind of falls apart a little bit easy, but I figure if you're not making it for anybody else, if you can do it that way, it really helps cut back again on the calories and the fat that
So
way.
you don't add anything else, just one can
Of diet soda.
of cake mix.
Yep. So, yeah. So, and again, they're when you use those kind of things, they don't turn out exactly the same. Like I said, the rising part of it might be one thing, but it's still really, really good. It's not like it's a bad cake. It's just not what you're necessarily used to. But a lot of the things that I kind of talked about before I was with Madonna, I was with Hy-Vee, and so I was a dietitian there, and I gotta try out my recipes on a lot of people, a lot of customers, and that's where I'm with the hot fudge cake. They had no idea. Same thing with the spice cake and the pumpkin. They just flipped over it. They thought I was crazy that that you can make something so good for just that way and make little tweaks for it. So there's lots. It's fun because there's lots of little things you can do to just take those yummy foods and make them a little bit better. So hopefully you guys got some good ideas, whether it's for football parties or just the holidays are coming up too. There's going to be different dips and things like that you can be trying, and hopefully you have some ideas for just making tweaks on your traditional ones. Does anybody have any other questions, comments, anything like that? Okay, so again, you have your recipes on there. On the other side too, there's just different tips and tricks for making other tailgate foods a little bit healthier. So we talked about kind of the chili one, but there's different things. If you're still warm enough to grill out and such, you've got some ideas for that as well. Okay. All right, well that's all I got. I can stick around for a little bit.